Akihiko Sanada, the boxing juggernaut of the S.E.E.S team, is a noble and charming character that has a simple yet satisfying character arc, and it's one that hits hard for me personally, but this video isn't about me. In this video, I'll be going over Akihiko's growth as a character, and as always, I'll also be giving additional context on his character by going in detail about the mythology and reasoning of his persona choices and arcana as well, since these are details that are easy to overlook by accident. Also, like my other persona analysis videos, I'll be using the movies and the games as a reference since they both do a good job of developing him as a character. There's a lot to cover and I don't want to waste any of your time, so let's get into the background of Akihiko. Akihiko is the captain of the boxing team at his school Gekkoukan High, and he's also a third-year student. He's best friends with Shinjiro Aragaki since they grew up in an orphanage together, and he used to have a little sister named Miki, but tragedy struck when their orphanage caught fire and it took her life. Shinji and Akihiko remain friends, but from that point forward, Akihiko was never the same. He blamed himself for not being strong enough to protect her, so he vowed to train to be stronger to protect those around him. What Akihiko fears the most isn't necessarily weakness, but just the thought of losing those close to him again. Like I said, he blames himself for what happened, so he trains relentlessly to try and prevent this because he feels like his strength could be enough to protect those close to him. But this is one of his biggest shortcomings as a person since it's just an impossible task. His blind devotion to becoming stronger indirectly leads him to ignoring what's most important. He's smart, serious, caring, and thoughtful, but he's also one of the most oblivious characters when it comes to understanding and recognizing human emotions, which can tie into his arcana, which is that of the Emperor. The Emperor Arcana represents authority, stability, and structure. In Persona, it's mainly represented by masculine characters, and all of these represent Akihiko pretty well. Characters of the Emperor Arcana tend to be stuck in their ways, believing their way of approaching things is the only right way to do it. But over time, through support groups like S.E.E.S for Akihiko and major events, they grow past it and realize their wrongs and grow to understand that it's okay to lean on people and not be independent and authoritative as always. The main thing that helps Akihiko to grow past his shortcomings brought on by his past is Shinjiro, but that's something I prefer to delve into more once we get there. His blindness to how people feel can lead to him being aggressive and somewhat confrontational, and if nothing else can just lead to saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. The best example is how he keeps pestering Shinji to join the group again and again, and even tells him to stop running from his past, not realizing he's indirectly doing the same thing since he blindly thinks getting stronger can solve everything. While we're speaking on Shinji, why don't we go ahead and go into Akihiko's first tier persona since they're so interconnected. Akihiko's first tier persona is Polydeuces. He was the half-brother of Castor, which is Shinji's persona, but he inherited immortality while Castor was a mere mortal. Yet despite that, they still had loyalty and care for one another. Polydeuces as an Argonaut took place in a boxing contest and defeated King Amicus. This is clearly representative of Akihiko's prowess as a boxer and his unparalleled physical strength among S.E.E.S bar Shinjiro. In Greek mythology, their cousins had duped them out of a herd, and as a result, they both vowed to get revenge. But when they proceeded with their plan, Castor ended up being killed by an arrow. But before that, Castor warned Polydeuces so he could survive. As Castor lay there dying, Polydeuces was given two options by Zeus. He could give up half of his immortality to Castor, or he could spend all of his time on Mount Olympus. Polydeuces had chosen to give up some of his immortality, and as a result, they became the two brightest stars of the constellation Gemini. In most artistic depictions, they're associated with horses, which is interesting because only Castor has done so in Persona 3. That aspect isn't too important though. What's more important is the main dynamic of the two half-brothers. Polydeuces represented physical prowess and strength, and Castor represented bravery and loyalty. Castor was limited by his mortality while Polydeuces had much more divinity since he was, immortal. Despite this though, their bond and loyalty is something that is undeniable, and the adventures they share together outside of the ones I even mentioned here make them respected figures in Greek mythology that represent their connection and bond. And if you are aware of these stories, then to be honest, you probably could have guessed where their character arcs would go as a result. Without Shinjiro, Akihiko never would have grown as a person to realize his faults. And although it took very drastic circumstances, which I will detail more later on when it's needed, it's safe to say Akihiko loved and respected Shinji more than basically anyone, which makes both of their stories really tragic. And with his backstory and persona covered, we can get into the start of the story. Not too much time into his persona, I know, but really the main thing here is to know that Polydeuces is close to Castor. From the very start of the game, you can tell a lot about him and the details I mentioned earlier. On April 7th, he talks to Mitsuru and confidently goes out on his own to get some practice against the shadows, which shows his bravery and courage, but also his shortcoming in the fact that he thinks his strength can solve everything and overcome all of his problems. This is proven on April 9th, when a full moon occurs and he gets attacked by a massive shadow, presumably the magician, and gets injured badly and tries to scruff it off as no big deal. Even after that event in the following weeks, he constantly tries to train and wants to fight despite his injuries, which shows his hard-headedness as I mentioned during the Emperor Arcana point. He seems to actually really enjoy fighting the shadows, at least during the early parts of the game. Even though he realizes the inherent risk of what they're doing and fighting for, he just can't help himself. But it's not like he's a bad guy or arrogant or anything like that. As I mentioned, he does really care for others and does want to end the Dark Hour and fight for non-malicious reasons. He's just blind to the reality of the situation at times, and this is his coping mechanism for dealing with the things like Shinjiro leaving the team after accidentally killing Ken's mother, and of course the death of his younger sister Miki at the orphanage. This dynamic of his regret and sensitivity of the previously mentioned events is something that is elaborated upon countless times as the game progresses, and is the main focus of him and his character arc. And just in case you wanted another example of him being obsessed with power, on May 9th, another full moon operation occurs and Akihiko's first thought is that it'll be a good time. And when Mitsuru tells him he can't go, he gets angry and defensive. Despite being logical when it comes to something he wants to do, he's very hard-headed even if it's not a good decision to make. To not focus entirely on the negative parts of his character though, let's actually prove he cares for others and doesn't fight for totally selfish reasons. On May 29th, Akihiko's first linked episode is available, and he invites Makoto to get some food to thank him for being the leader of S.E.E.S. Before they're able though, some fangirls of his try to talk to him and more or less he blows them off. Once he sees them in danger from some thugs however, he stands up for them and gives them a moment to run away. Once the thugs try to find him, he basically says he's gonna run their shit. Well, he said it a lot more elegantly than me, but anyway, he shows full confidence that he could win against the thug that he wanted to fight, and he's 100% right to have confidence here. I mean, he's more or less the level of a pro. This isn't the same situation as him fighting literal shadows, but before they're able to do anything, the cops pull up and break everything up. Thankfully, Kurosawa-san bails them out of the situation, but this first linked episode is a good glimpse as to who he actually is as a person deep down, despite the flaws he may have. He wants to help people and set a good standard for those around him, and that includes Makoto himself. Akihiko's linked episodes are all about him becoming closer to Makoto and everyone else, and accepting his shortcomings to strive to be a better person, and I'll go over them as they appear chronologically in the story. Going more into his care for other people, and his desire to fight for more than his own strength, when they discover that Fuka has gone missing in Tartarus, he says this.
あんなシャドウいっぱいのところにペルソナも使えない普通の人がいたら
ならこのまま見殺しにするのか。すまない。方法はある。山岸と同じ方法でタルタロスに入るんだ。
最悪二重遭難という可能性もある。しかし
助かる可能性があるのに放っておくなんて俺にはできない。後悔したくないんだ。お前らが行かないなら俺一人で行く。
先輩。
During the actual operation itself, he also shows another aspect of himself, and that's his awareness. When they find Fuka, Akihiko is the first to realize that on each full moon, a massive shadow of an arcana appears and rushes to the entrance to try and help Mitsuru and Yukari who are being attacked. It's a good demonstration that he can be smart when it calls for it, and from that point forward they were able to prepare for each subsequent full moon operation better. On June 23rd, we have the first scene with Shinjiro and Aki. Well, technically the second, but this is the first real one with depth and importance to it. Aki is trying once again to get Shinji to join the team, and once he refuses, this back and forth occurs.
I made up my mind a long time ago. I ain't going back.
You have to let the past go. What's done is done. It's time you moved on.
You should talk.
What?
Face it, you're no different than me.
Hey, Shinji!
This goes back to what I said at the start where Akihiko is stuck in the past and regrets what happened to Miki, and doesn't even truly realize what he's doing. He's been selfish and oblivious to what's happening with himself, and even after this conversation he wouldn't truly realize it, but this was his first step toward realizing his faults, and his silence somewhat proves it. Skipping a bit ahead to July 11th, S.E.E.S have a meeting to discuss the previous Dark Hour, and Yukari points out all the problems she's had with Mitsuru and Akihiko. I made an analysis of her character and how she feels during this moment if you want to check that out, but to summarize, she feels like she's being used by Mitsuru and Akihiko to work for S.E.E.S and destroy the Dark Hour, and that's exemplified by the fact they've been hiding information from them. Yukari says Akihiko probably doesn't care either way as long as he's able to have a good fight, which as I mentioned before is both correct and incorrect. He does want to have a good fight and get stronger above all else, but he genuinely does just want to help people around him. This is his real first step toward growth, however, because a couple days later when he speaks with Shinji, he says he's been questioning his reason for fighting ever since Yukari called him out. He explains that his desire to become stronger has come first and foremost, which, wow, what a shocker, right? But anyway, this wavering resolve on his reason for fighting is shown from there onward too. During Akihiko's second linked episode on July 24th, it's elaborated on a bit more. It begins with those thugs from the first one trying to jump him again, but Makoto gives them an opening to run so things don't escalate out of control. And once they return, Aki sees a massive package with things like beverages and snacks in it. His foster parents sent them to him, and it shows that he thankfully has a good relationship with his guardians. Not something many people can say in S.E.E.S, unfortunately. Anyway, Aki and Makoto decide to share all the items with the others, and he says thinking about his parents reminded him of his reason for fighting, but then he asks Makoto where he gets his strength from, which leads to this back and forth.
You take on the role of our leader, and you're stronger than anyone else in your own right. That's more than just being talented. Where do you get that strength from? Oh, I see. You mean you feel motivated because you have people in your corner? Bonds with others, huh? That might be something I'm missing.
This is another early sign that he's understanding his shortcomings as a person, and that he doesn't actually have many true close bonds with people besides Shinji, and to an extent Mitsuru, but he never really got to know Mitsuru personally or closely like that for the most part, which isn't entirely his fault, but I digress. And the third linked episode, it proves he really did keep this in mind, but let's not go too far ahead of ourselves here, we still got some things to go over before then. The next full moon operation is another good sign of Akihiko's doubt about his reasons for fighting and just himself in general. And it's one I've mentioned basically in every other analysis video thus far, just because I think it's a good demonstration of how people feel near the midpoint of the story. On August 6th, as S.E.E.S go into an underground war bunker to find the Justice and Chariot arcana, they're ambushed by a rival persona group called Shrega. Shrega picks apart their reasons for fighting, and Akihiko is the first to lash back at them. And once they ask if they wish to return to how they were before the Dark Hour came along, Akihiko shows clear hesitation. And once they lock S.E.E.S in, he gets furious, showing his hot-headedness. I do find it interesting how subtle yet important the responses they have here are though, and you can really infer a lot from it. And it just backs up how he felt about his doubts about fighting from Yukari's confrontation. Not too much more I want to touch up on regarding that full moon operation, so I'd like to move forward to the next time Akihiko tries to convince Shinji to come back. This isn't too important in the grand scheme of things for Akihiko in particular, but what's important is that once they talk about the incident where Shinjiro accidentally killed Ken's mother, Ken eavesdrops in and hears everything, which sparks his motive to kill Shinjiro and get revenge for his mom. It is very tragic, and it's what brings Ken to want to join S.E.E.S and fight the shadows, or that's what he says, but his ultimate motive is to get a chance to kill Shinji, which would indirectly lead to the growth of both Akihiko and Ken respectively. But again, let me not get too ahead of myself. I would like to note that the way the movies detail this aspect of the story is a lot different, and I do actually prefer it, so I would like to go over that for the next little bit. In the movies, Shinjiro finds out Ken had joined S.E.E.S from Shrega, and decides to come back on his own accord to make up for what he did. And it's important to note that Ken doesn't actually know Shinji was the one responsible for everything, so they all end up getting pretty close to each other. But on September 5th, after defeating the next big shadow on the full moon, Shinjiro's persona goes berserk, and not only does Akihiko realize what Shinji has been doing, but Ken also realizes he had killed his mother, which is the spark for his revenge. The fact everyone got closer is what makes it even more tragic than it already was. After Shinji's persona goes berserk, he runs off and starts getting attacked by it, and as a result has to take the persona suppressant pills. Akihiko confronts him about taking them, and they have this gut-wrenching talk.
俺のせいでガキ一人の人生ねじ曲げちまったのは紛れもない事実だ。
やはりお前が戻ってきたのはアマダのためか。
そんなもん何の償いにもなりゃしねえ。自分じゃペルソナの抑えが効かねえんだからな。
だから薬に頼った。なぜだ。なぜ俺に黙って薬なんかに頼った。なぜ俺に。
てめえに相談でもすりゃなんとかなったのかよ。
副作用はもう出てるのか。
まだ行きゃしねえよ。最後にけじめつけるまではな。
Akihiko's pain here and Shinji's responses proves his focus on strength has made him blind to what's happening. He couldn't understand Shinji's struggles and was disconnected, which similarly to what I said with Mitsuru wasn't entirely his fault, but the main point is his strength means absolutely nothing, because once again someone close to him is doomed to die regardless of what happens now, and it's a thought that has tormented him for years come to life. And not only would it be a mere thought, but a reality. On October 4th, Akihiko as a person would change forever. On this date, the group are tasked to defeat the Strength and Fortune Arcana shadows, but Ken and Shinjiro are nowhere to be found. Again, I love the way the movies approach this moment infinitely more than the game, so I'll be basing this date off of that adaptation again. Once they arrive at the strip mall where the shadows await them, Akihiko and Mitsuru realize why Ken and Shinji are absent, and desperately try to locate and get to them before it's too late. Fuka is able to locate them, but the shadows ambush them at the worst time. During this fight, Akihiko shows desperation and emotion we've never seen from him before, and as all of this is happening, the two of them are ambushed by Strega, as if things couldn't get worse. Makoto then hesitates to attack the Fortune Arcana, but after some pushing, they're able to defeat them and rush over to Ken and Shinji, but they're far too late. Shinjiro is shot twice by Takaya to save Ken's life. Akihiko's worst nightmare has become a reality right before his very eyes, and all he can do is be there for him in his final moments. And at this point, I'll let the moment speak for himself.
アキ、こいつを。
ああ。
これでいい。
The day after, the school has a funeral for Shinjiro, but Akihiko opts to skip out and eat at the ramen shop he and Shinji frequented a few times before. After school, however, he gains the courage to face Shinji on his own, and since this is so important, I'd prefer to let him speak for himself and go over the scene afterward.
Come on, say something. Why do you have to be like that? Always going off without saying a word. Put yourself in my shoes for a change. You think it's the other way around? Yeah, you're right. I was always the one running off on my own. I was too obsessed with getting stronger, ever since I lost Miki. That's all I've cared about. I thought if I was strong enough, I could protect anyone, but I was wrong. And now you're gone too. God. It's like the world is laughing at me. I knew what we were getting into. I knew we were putting our lives on the line, but I was so focused on fighting that I didn't see anything else. It doesn't matter how strong I was. Look what happened! I know, Shinji. Crying won't change anything, right? I don't need you to tell me that. In the end, I can't run away from who I am. I've had enough of this.
So in this moment, Akihiko is the very first character in modern Persona to evolve his first tier persona, and he transforms Polydeuces into Caesar. Akihiko letting go of Polydeuces goes back to the original story, where after Castor had died, the two of them became the brightest stars in the constellation Gemini. If he had held on to Polydeuces after the fact, it would have been a sign of him being stuck in the past. But alas, him evolving into Caesar is a clear as day, showing that he's not the same person he was before. His total blindness to get stronger has faded away, and now he just wants to be a better person, for his own sake as well as Shinji's sake. But how come Caesar was the choice for his change of heart? Well, my friend, that's what I'm here to explain. Caesar was a title of imperial character in Rome, and in some countries became the word for that of emperor. It was derived from the Roman general Gaius Julius Caesar, and since Akihiko's the Emperor Arcana and Caesar was the highest ranking emperor, it's clear to see how that connects. Caesar was known as the dictator of life because he gave citizenship to many residents of Rome, and he also initiated land reforms for his veterans. Members of the Senate, fearful of Caesar's power, planned an assassination, and they were only successful because of Caesar's shock at being betrayed by Brutus, whom he trusted greatly. If not for this, he was powerful enough to fend off all of his attackers on his own, showing his great physical strength worthy of an emperor, and this is fitting for Akihiko as a character. Although Akihiko wasn't necessarily assassinated or anything, basically everything about Caesar is applicable to Akihiko. He demonstrated great leadership abilities, was known for his determination and stoicism, tried to help as many people as he could around him, and overall it's just representative of Akihiko's resolve to face challenges head on without hesitation. You can argue he was like this before, but his blindness before awakening is what truly kept him from being the logical leader he saw himself to be. From this moment forward in the game, Akihiko would be the most logical, determined, and wise character in the game debatably. All he wishes to do is to be there for the rest of S.E.E.S as a good role model and finish what he started, and to become a person Shinji and Miki could be proud of. The last main thing I'd like to mention about Caesar is the design itself. Caesar has a globe in his left hand because Caesar's great nephew was known as the ruler of the world, and his color scheme is a mixture of both Castor and Polydeuces. It's a cool design and is a good telling of what led him to become who he is, and is also parallel to Junpei's own awakening in which he combines Hermes with Medea. In the middle of Caesar is a figure, which could be representative of a few things. I'd say it's a sign of how even though Caesar is the emperor, he still has to abide by the Senate, and that very Senate is what led to his assassination. In the context of Akihiko though, it's probably just a sign that he can't do whatever he wants or say whatever he wants and have it be the correct way, as he would have believed it to be so before in his form Polydeuces. Alright, a lot of information and cool stuff regarding his new persona, but there are clear and obvious signs of his growth, and I'd like to prove it. The very next day, after Ken storms out on his own to think about everything that happened, Akihiko meets him at the site of where it all happened. Ken vents his pain, and instead of Akihiko being a hard ass about wanting him to come back, he instead just says this.
The dead are never coming back. You have to accept that. But you still have your life. I'm not here to bring you back. You can waste away here if that's what you want. But if you still have the will to fight, then come back and stand on your own 2 feet.
Before Shinjiro's death, he probably would have tried to convince him that what he's doing isn't right, but instead he understands that it isn't the right thing to do and resolves to let him figure things out on his own. See, that was something that Akihiko did wrong with Shinji. He didn't try to understand where he was coming from and just wanted him to come back and forget everything. But now that he sees his errors, he's immediately proving that while he does still care for people, he can't just have things go his way that easily. Not to mention the fact that he actually forgives and understands Ken's stance on what happened. I don't think many people in Akihiko's shoes would have been able to do that, and I think it's something people overlook. I mean, a big reason as to why his best friend is gone is right before him, but he doesn't really care and just wants best for everyone involved. Akihiko's words are what helped Ken to evolve his own persona and grow past his grief as well, and return to the group. And if that isn't a clear sign of his growth, then to be honest, I don't really know what is. Reload added some new scenes that better exemplify this growth as well. On October 9th, Akihiko asks Makoto to help him make pancakes for everyone to cheer them up after, well, you know, which is actually an amazing addition to his character because it really shows that he's being more compassionate to everyone and not just Ken, which I feel is something that was missing and didn't get focused on enough in the original game, and it's what I alluded to in the second linked episode. He really kept Makoto's thoughts in mind all that time. Back on topic though, Aki reveals that the medal he received in episode 2 was made by Miki, and he wasn't sure if he's worthy of having it. He doesn't know what it means to be strong or kind, and he feels he hasn't grown at all since those days at the orphanage. But then he says this.
I realized I'd just been running away all this time, making excuses about having my own problems. But from now on, I'm gonna protect it all. We promised we'd become strong together. I won't let him down. Thanks, I really appreciate that. I'll be counting on you next time.
God, these linked episodes made Akihiko so much better as a character. Just this dynamic of his doubts about himself and him becoming closer to Makoto and the others helps so damn much. I feel like it makes him more of a human character, and it shows that even though he has grown past thinking he's doing everything right, he's now gotten new doubts about himself. Or maybe the old doubts he had been ignoring to cope are more apparent now. Either way, it's a great storyline, and it proves he's not fighting onward for just himself anymore, just in case you needed another piece of proof about that. Since Akihiko's character arc is the earliest one to be developed, it's time we go ahead and skip way onward near the end of the game. Could I talk about more of the smaller scenes? Sure, but at this point I feel like it's unnecessary. There comes a point in an analysis where you have to keep things concise, and this is definitely the time. On December 3rd, it's revealed that Ryoji, who is a good friend of Junpei and Makoto, is the harbinger of the fall, and the major shadows they have defeated have basically brought upon the fall. Ryoji gives them a hard choice. They can choose to kill Ryoji and forget everything that happened until the fall begins, or they can spare Ryoji and face Nyx, who supposedly cannot be defeated. They have until December 31st to make their decision, and everyone deals with this information differently. I really like how the movies portray Akihiko during this time, so I'd like to go back to that adaptation for a moment. In the movie, during the meeting they have a week later, no one knows what choice to make, and after an ill-timed joke from Yukari directed toward Junpei, a conflict escalates. It leads to this back and forth between Junpei and Akihiko, as well as everyone else, and it's one of the greatest scenes in the entire narrative in my opinion.
死ぬって話だぞ。怖いに決まってんだろ。なんでお前らそんなに冷静なんだよ。絶対死ぬって意味考えたんかよ。
順平くん、落ち着いて。
見苦しいぞ、順平。何すかしてんだよ、真田さんも。
いいより。
いつもみたいに言ってくださいよ。俺たちは戦うだけだとか、逃げるわけにはいかないとか、らしくねえよ。何ビビってんすか。
やめろ、秋彦。真田さん。
戦って済む相手ならもちろん戦うさ。だが見ろ、今この時も世界は終わりに向かって進む一方だ。目に見えない得体の知れない力によってな。そんなものとどう戦えばいい。俺たちに何ができる。結局ビビってんじゃねえか。お前の言う通りだ、順平。俺だって怖くて仕方がない。真田先輩。
So here, that coping mechanism I mentioned before where Akihiko will view things as logically as possible to avoid being hurt is in full force here, but it's in a completely different context. Rather than him trying to ignore the past and what's happening, he's now trying to ignore the inevitable future, which is arguably infinitely more terrifying, which is backed up by everyone's responses. This is more or less the one and only time Akihiko freaks out and loses his cool in a huge way in the story, and I think he's very justified if I do say so myself. Also in the movie, Akihiko invites Makoto out to get a bite to eat to pay him back for winning during the Operation Babe Hunt before it's too late, which is both funny and tragic considering the circumstances. Swapping back to the game though, Akihiko is one of the first to resolve to fight Nyx. In Akihiko's 4th linked episode, he alongside Makoto smoked the fuck out of those bummy ass thugs after they made threats toward the girls, and after that, Akihiko invites him to his room. Akihiko admits he was afraid and angry that the fall was coming, and that everything he's been working toward could be for nothing. He also questions whether he's strong enough, but Makoto helps him realize that setbacks like these are only natural. Despite all of that though, he says no matter what choice Makoto makes, his resolve is to stand tall and fight Nyx, even if it meant he would have to do it alone. Well, he didn't say that last part, but that's basically how he feels, and it leads to this back and forth.
If I said all my training was meaningless, then that would be spitting on all of their efforts too. And that would be absolutely unacceptable. Wouldn't you agree? For a long time, all I cared about was having the power to protect others. And I thought being hard on myself and competing with others was the only way I was gonna do that. Although, it is true that I've gotten more capable through my reckless approach. But now, there are others who fight alongside me. So I have people who I want to protect, but at the same time, I want them to be there fighting with me in the end. It's because I have all of you that I feel like I can become even stronger. I still don't know if I'm strong or kind enough to deserve this medal, but this is my starting point, and it's something that I should keep with me.
Considering this is one of the last major moments you'll see with Akihiko before the final linked episode and New Year's Eve, I think it's honestly just beautiful. And this new addition to Reload, like I said earlier, just makes Akihiko feel so much more human and alive. You get to really see his struggles and doubts with himself, and he grows past just wanting to be this gung-ho person that he was mainly seen as in the original narrative. This version of Akihiko truly makes it feel like he actually understands he isn't alone and doesn't have to go through these battles on his own. After having that conversation and moment with everyone, on December 23rd, Akihiko meets Ken at the place of Shinji's death. Akihiko simply says he's going to face Nyx and death head on, as he mentioned in the previous linked episode, and that also gives Ken the courage to stand by his side and fight as well. This scene is pretty great too because it shows how much Ken looks up to Akihiko, and how Akihiko's goal of being a good role model is coming to fruition, and this is also shown on December 31st when they make their choice.
You're the only one saying it's impossible. Personally, I don't care if it is.
The final thing to go over before we head into the final battle is Akihiko's final linked episode. For the finale, Akihiko talks about what he wants to do for the future, and he resolves the thought that he would want to become an officer of the law and be more like Kurosawa-san, which I might add is pretty ironic because he shares Akihiko's old voice actor, but I digress. Aki wants to take a path that will let him fight, but also let him do the right thing and help people, so becoming an officer was only natural for him. And he ended up doing just that in Persona 4 Arena. He traveled the world to become stronger and joined the Shadow Operatives group led by Mitsuru to continue the fight against the Shadows, and then he eventually decided he would leave the group and pursue his initial goal of becoming an officer. So just to summarize Akihiko's journey through this arc of the game, he goes from being blinded by his pursuit of strength as a coping mechanism, and as a result, he ignores almost everything else. He doesn't want to become closer to everyone, and he feels he can do everything he needs to do on his own. Now, it's basically the opposite. His initial goal of wanting to help and protect people has stayed intact, but now he realizes he cannot and does not want to do it on his own. He values his friends and fights for them, Shinji, Miki, the world's sake, and a brighter future. Alright, for the most part, I believe I've covered everything I feel is needed for Akihiko's character through the journey, so we can get into the Judgment Day where the team fight Nyx. There really isn't too much to talk about regarding Akihiko here, but the main thing I'd like to show is after the team failed to defeat Nyx's avatar. Makoto awakens to the universe and goes to fight Nyx on his own, and Akihiko says this to keep everyone on the team calm.
What can we do? How can we help him?
Don't give up! We're gonna get through this, together!
Once Makoto uses the Great Seal to defeat Nyx, everyone is transported to a beautiful space-like dimension. And once the prospect of Makoto being gone comes to light, Akihiko, as you would expect, does not take it well. I mean, his entire mission and goal is to protect those around him, and if he had failed to protect Makoto, the person who helped him to grow closer to everyone and as a person, he would have felt like a total failure.
Damn it! Not again!
Thankfully, Makoto does return, at least for a moment, and Akihiko starts crying. It's a beautiful moment for everyone, and it shows how far each and every one of them have grown as people and a friend group. And it's time to talk about the most painful ending in any game I've ever played. I've talked about it at the end of each analysis video, so I'll keep this one nice and precise. After they defeated Nyx in the Dark Hour, they forgot their memories of everything, and this includes Akihiko's memory of Shinji's death. Thankfully, they remember the promise they all made to meet on the rooftop on graduation day, and they make their way there. And since it's just a great ending, I'll let a bit of it play out before we go into the answer section of this analysis.
It'll be okay. I'm right by your side, here to protect you forevermore.
So in case you aren't aware of how Persona 3's The Journey ends, Makoto passed away on the rooftop shortly after everyone arrived. Now, let's put ourselves in the shoes of Akihiko here. The best friend that taught you what being a leader means. The best friend that helped you understand becoming closer to people is something you lacked. And the best friend that was just there for you through thick and thin and helped you so many times has passed away before your very eyes. Again. Because, let's not forget, he already saw Shinji die not even that long before. Akihiko at the start of the answer doesn't intend to return to the dorm again to see it off, which could definitely be his coping mechanism for the previous event. One thing leads to another though, and he does appear and gets trapped inside alongside everyone else. Skipping ahead a bit, we get to see how he became a Persona user, and it's revealed that it was Mitsuru who convinced him to join, explaining their connection at the start of the game. With the prospect of learning about the shadows and the Dark Hour, and becoming stronger, he decided to join the fight against the shadows. This mainly ties back into his former self where the sole thing he desired was strength, but his nonchalant and unbothered demeanor after seeing the past shows he doesn't mind it as much as the other members do their own respective past. And if you'd like to see more about them, you can always check out my analysis playlist at the top right of the screen now. To be honest, there's only a couple other things I'd like to detail before we wrap up this analysis. After the team gain all their keys, they're given two options. They can go back in the past to before Makoto died, or they can continue ahead in the present and look forward to their future. Like I said before, Akihiko is really the most logical character here in the discussion that follows, and it also shows that even though he doesn't agree with what Yukari and Mitsuru choose, now that he understands them and their emotions a bit more, he doesn't try to budge on it too hard. I'll let a bit of the discussion play out so we can get insight into Akihiko's perspective and how he as a character in the face of yet another massive choice is.
I want to go back to the time before the last battle. If there's a way for him to come back, I'll take it, no matter what. Yukari.
So, you're giving up? Are you saying you don't have the strength to face reality? After all the things we've gone through, you're just gonna throw in the towel in the fight against yourself?
Oh yeah, you're really one to be throwing around all those high-minded ideals. If you really thought something was that precious to you, you'd want to protect it no matter what. Don't you understand? We can go back and fix things. Are you seriously just gonna let a chance like this go?
Then I'll ask you this. If I said I wanted to undo your father's death, would you do it? Even if there was a way to reverse Shinji and Miki's death, I'd flat out refuse. Nothing in the past was a waste. You're just making excuses.
All that talk about accepting the present is because when you get down to it, you only care about yourselves.
What?
How can you say that?
I'm going to stand with Yukari.
Senpai.
You're taking her side? Are you serious? I know you well enough to tell your mind's made up. All right.
So he says going back in time is basically disrespectful to the sacrifice Makoto made for them, and that the things that happened to them all happened for a reason. Even though the death of Miki and Shinji is something that will live with him forever, since it made him who he is, he wouldn't have it any other way. And by the end of the answer, that's how basically everyone feels about it. It's cool because all of these moments of logic are just him seeing the good in everything, which is not something that he could do earlier in the story, nor could most people in the real world do today. I truly doubt many people in Akihiko's shoes would be able to view it that way, but hold up. I don't want to give him too much credit because while he did understand their views when it changed from his words, it's not like he was perfect here. His brutal honesty and logic was still somewhat detrimental in this conversation because Yukari was clearly on the verge of a mental breakdown, but he honestly just made it way worse. Granted, the fight for the keys would have most likely happened anyways, but it just shows how Akihiko is as a person. And this isn't necessarily a bad character trait, just a bad time and place for it. He still had good intentions despite all of this. The final thing I will mention about Akihiko's character is right before the Erebus fight. Once Mitsuru says that Erebus is the cause of all of their troubles, Akihiko with few words says they're gonna have to defeat it if they want to look toward a better future. Otherwise, they just be cowards basically. It shows that from that moment of Shinji and Makoto's death, he was focused more so on becoming stronger and better as a person, which as I've said about 500 times now, has and always will be the driving point of his character. And he's always looking toward the future rather than the past as he was before. Alright, so that's all I've got to say for Akihiko Sanada's character arc. Like I said, it's a very simple and somewhat linear progression, but that doesn't mean it's bad at all. Quite the opposite. His arc doesn't have some crazy overarching plot twist, it isn't mind-blowing, it isn't the most wowing thing on the planet, but it's simply a satisfying and great character arc to see evolve, and it's one I can relate to a lot. I've always been the type of person to try to take on challenges on my own for better or worse, and while it has given me some independence in some ways, it also leads me to dying on some hills that are just not necessary. It was something I dealt with mostly in middle school through high school, where I would bottle up things and try to be a good role model, or at least a voice of reason, so to speak, but that just became tiresome and quite honestly dumb. I just accepted that I am who I am, and that's about it. I can't say I had any tragic passing like Akihiko did, but I can definitely see where he was coming from as a character. Coping by doing everything on his own, focusing solely on training, and sometimes sacrificing bonds with people are things I did a couple times. Seeing Akihiko grow past this and be more dependent on his friends and break out of that toxic mindset was really inspiring, and I appreciate him as a character a lot for that. He's by no means a perfectly written character, but honestly, I'd rather focus on the things I do like about him and his journey rather than all the negative. Because, let's be honest guys, I think we see far too much negativity in the Persona fandom as it is. I don't want to drag this out too much, so just for the one time, I'll reiterate his growth before we close out. Akihiko starts as a man being blinded by his pursuit of strength as a coping mechanism, and as a result, he ignores almost everything else. He doesn't want to become closer to everyone, and he feels he can do everything he needs to do on his own. Once he realized the foolishness of his ways through the trials the game put him through, his initial goal of wanting to help and protect people stayed intact, but now he realizes he cannot and does not want to do it on his own. He values his friends and fights for them, Shinji, Miki, the world's sake, and a brighter future. All of which he had succeeded in by joining the Shadow Operatives and resolving to be an officer to help people. With that summary of Aki's character, that's about all I have to say regarding this analysis. Was there anything I missed that you think I should have added? How do you feel about Akihiko as a character? Can you relate to him and the things he went through? I want to hear what you all think, so as always, I'll be replying to every single comment on this video. Responding to everyone is by far my favorite aspect of making these videos for sure. Alright, I don't want to take any more of your time, but if you enjoyed the video, please consider dropping a like and a subscribe. It's been your boy Yandere Gogeta, and I will see you in the next video. Peace out and have a great day.